Hello, this is a presentation on the theory of gender studies by Marvin Wu, Christian Kim, Lucas Ho, Shane Trung, and Audrey Ove. First, we will be discussing what it means for gender studies to be used as a theory. According to the UCLA College of Social Sciences, gender studies is an interdisciplinary field that focuses on the complex interaction of gender, race, class, and sexuality in social relations, institutions, and systems. In other words, it examines the role of gender roles in society. There are many works of literature through which gender studies can be expressed, giving a bigger picture on how society lays the groundwork for what we know as gender. The reason this matters is that the roles of gender in society have implications that affect everyone, as they are integrated into our everyday lives. History proves this, everyday fields experience this, and social norms confirm this. Understanding gender studies as a theoretical framework is important because it helps explain how gender roles are socially constructed, how they influence individual experiences and opportunity, and how they continue to shape institutions and cultural expectations in today's society. Now that we know what gender studies is and why it matters to us, let's dive into its origins and history. The fundamental principles of gender studies rose out of the women's liberation movement and the civil rights movement of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. The proponents of these movements fought to challenge the roles that society had gotten used to, like gender. The women's liberation movement started by focusing on equal rights like women's right to vote, aka suffrage, but continued to spread into recognizing women's importance in society, making waves in fields like education and government, and even questioning the men-centered dynamics in academics and culture. As the 20th century drew to a close, the fundamental tenets of gender studies began to surface, inspiring deeper discussion of what the theory means. Later in this presentation, we will analyze a film called Mulan Rise of a Warrior, which is an excellent example of this growing movement and the implications of shifting gender roles. This is because the film highlights the battle between gender stereotypes and identity, while being popular with audiences during a time period of changing cultural gender expectations. Many activists and theorists played a role in developing the gender studies theory. Just to name a few, Catherine R. Stimson founded the Journal of Science, which was the first to recognize and conceptualize gender studies as a theory. Next, there is Jack Halberstam, who was the first to discuss the social construct of gender. Then Judith Lorber, who expanded the social construction of gender through sociology. And last for this portion was Robin Wickman, who examined the shift from women's studies to gender studies. Next, Bell Hooks, the intentionally lowercase pen name of Gloria Jean Watkins, sought to expand the fight for feminism to encapsulate the relationship between race, class, and gender. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, one of the core tenets of gender studies. And Judith Butler pioneered the concept of quote-unquote gender performity, highlighting gender as an active social construction not naturally formed. Speaking of the major tenets of our theory, they are listed here. They include but are not limited to power dynamics, intersectionality, social construct, and cultural expression. Power dynamics describe how organizational structures like education, medicine, and law reinforce the gender roles that we're familiar with, setting standards of who gets the power. Intersectionality goes on to explain how many parts of a person's identity, including their gender, impact their perception of and experience of oppression and inequality. Social construct is the big idea that sex is a biological construct separate from gender as a social construct, meaning that society determines the quote-unquote correct gender roles. Additionally, cultural expression understands that people around the world perceive gender differently, which is expressed differently in their culture. This can be through what they wear, how media portrays gender, and how the literature of the times changes its take on gender roles. Now we will analyze 3 different texts through the lens of gender studies, gaining new insight on how literature conceptualizes these pillars of gender studies. Our first text is a well-known poem by Maya Angelou called Still I Rise. Maya Angelou was an American author, poet, and activist who used her work to share her fight against inequality and injustice both in race and gender. Her most famous works include her autobiography called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings and the work we will be studying here called Still I Rise. The poem talks about the battle against oppression and the futility of holding back someone's voice. She boldly and repeatedly proclaims that no matter how hard they push her down, quote unquote, I still rise, challenging the traditional norm of women needing to be quiet and passive. She isn't afraid or embarrassed of who she is. Through the lens of gender studies, this poem reveals how personal identity is shaped by both larger societal systems rather than existing separate from them. Angelo's confidence and resistance challenges the expectation placed on marginalized groups, showing how literature can become a way to confront and redefine social norms. From a gender studies perspective, Angelo highlights the unbalanced power dynamics in society and her response to it. She says, "You may trod me in very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise." This can be seen in lines 3 through 4. This quote demonstrates the struggle between societal power structures attempting to suppress her and her own determination to overcome them. Angelo shows that while society may try to control her, she maintains the power to define her own identity. Also, her poem expresses intersectionality through her experiences that shape her identity and her identity that impacts the way she lives. As an African American woman living in the late 1900s, she must rise above the socio-cultural stereotypes coming from both her gender and race. For example, she asks, "Does my sassiness upset you?" This can be seen in line 5, and later says, "From a past that's rooted in pain, I rise," seen in lines 31 and 32, proving the point that she will still rise above social norms for women and above racial oppression. These lines highlight how Angelo's experiences are shaped by both her gender and race, creating a unique perspective on oppression. Her identity as an African American woman influences the challenges she faces, but also strengthens her ability to resist and rise above them. Angelo uses her poem to tell her story and how she rises above societal expectations for gender and race. Intersectionality allows the reader to better understand how overlapping identities shape experiences and discrimination and oppression. By rejecting societal expectations of women being quiet and passive, Angelo challenges traditional gender roles and encourages readers to question them. Her voice demonstrates the power of overcoming social barriers and defining one's own identity beyond societal expectations. Earlier in our presentation, we mentioned this second text titled Mulan, Rise of a Warrior, released in 2009 as an adaptation of the story. In Chinese folklore, Hua Mulan is a unique hero because of the fact that she was born a woman. Her tale was first told as an ancient oral folk song known as the Ballad of Mulan. Since then, Mulan's story has been retold again and again, always with the same premise of a woman becoming a hero, through adaptations like Lady General Hua Mulan, released in 1964, and Disney's animated and live-action versions, released in 1998 and 2020 respectively. The stories tell how a simple woman takes her sickly father's place in the army, fighting battles and gender stereotypes, and assuming roles as a leader and a warrior, roles that women were not typically allowed to have. The film demonstrates that gender roles are not only personal expectations, but also systems reinforced by communities and institutions. Through Mulan's journey, viewers can see how changing one's role can challenge the larger cultural beliefs surrounding gender. According to social construction, gender is what society makes of it. Through the film, Mulan's character traits such as intelligence, wit, and leadership are not changed, but the way she is perceived as. She was often seen with respect and submission when her role was in the possession of a man, like Commander. This demonstrates that society's perception of gender can influence how people are valued, even when their abilities remain the same. Mulan's experience shows that qualities such as leadership and intelligence are not naturally tied to one's gender, but often assigned through social expectations. From a power dynamics and cultural expression perspective, this remains true. These high positions of command were typically reserved for men, but Mulan challenged these gender expectations. On the flip side, the position of a woman was to be quiet, lowly, and restricted to the home sphere, compliance that Mulan refused. These points can be seen through the scenes in the movie where Mulan is in command and the soldiers loyally follow her orders. The military structure of the film reflects how institutions can reinforce gender roles by limiting who is allowed to hold authority and power. By entering this traditionally male-centered space, Mulan exposes the inequality created by these expectations and challenges the cultural beliefs surrounding women's roles. This film demonstrates that men and women are often judged by social standards of gender, not their abilities and qualities. Mulan's challenge of traditional gender roles show that social norms can constantly be formed and changed. Overall, Mulan Rise of a Warrior provides an example of how gender studies can uncover meaning that may not be immediately visible in a text. By analyzing the relationship between identity, power, and social expectations, the theory reveals how societies can reflect and question gender roles presented in society. The film encourages audiences to question whether gender roles are based on ability or simply the expectation created by society. Through Mulan's journey, the audience can see how challenging traditional norms can lead to broader understandings of identity and equality. The last and final text we will be analyzing is Barbie, directed by Greta Gerwig, following the protagonist Barbie, who lives in Barbie Land, a world where everything appears to be perfect. At the beginning of the film, Barbie believes that she must always be happy, beautiful, confident, and successful because those are the expectations placed on her. Since the film is based on the popular Barbie doll series, it explores expectations and ideals placed on women that the dolls have symbolized for years. However, Barbie begins to question herself and her purpose, which results in her perfect life beginning to change. Once Barbie's in the real world, she discovers that women are viewed and treated completely differently compared to Barbie Land. The experience of traveling to the real world and seeing different treatment is a catalyst in the film to explore gender expectations, identity, and social norms. One key component that Barbie focuses on is the power dynamic, which looks at how society gives power and influence to different groups. At the beginning of the movie, Barbie's identity is shaped by how society wants her to look. She believes that being perfect and attractive is what gives her value. She doesn't question it, as these expectations have become normalized in Barbie Land. When she finally visits the real world, she sees how differently women and men are treated. Men are often treated with more respect and authority than women. This further alters how she sees herself and helps her understand that her identity should not be based on what others think. This scene shows Barbie and Ken arriving the real world for the first time. They notice that people treat Ken with more respect simply because he is a male. Meanwhile, Barbie experiences objectification and unwanted attention. This moment is important because it introduces the unequal power dynamic that she hadn't experienced before then. This is the turning point that makes you question whether society's treatment of men and women is equal. Similarly, the movie also looks at challenging gender expectations. As the movie progresses, Barbie begins to question traditional gender expectations. She realizes that women face unrealistic and impossible beauty standards and are always expected to be perfect. Instead of following those expectations, she rejects them. She realizes that she shouldn't have other people define who she should be and instead should make choices for herself. This scene shows Barbie's decision to be human instead of a perfect doll everyone wants her to be. This is significant because it shows accepting imperfection, making mistakes, and taking power to create her own identity. Barbie is then able to decide what she wants in her life. So why does this matter? The movie shows that people should not let society dictate their values and identity. Barbie learns to separate her identity from the unrealistic expectations placed on her. Her journey reminds the audience that perfection is impossible and constantly chasing it can limit a person's identity. People should define themselves on their own values and goals. This connects to gender studies because it examines how social influences can affect a person's identity and relationships. Barbie encourages viewers to question traditional gender roles and recognize that everyone has the freedom to do and be whatever they want. Finally, these are the conclusions we made about the theory of gender studies. Some of the strengths of the theory are that what is considered quote unquote normal gender behavior varies across time and place, meaning unique gender roles aren't superior or set in stone, and that intersectionality expresses how the interconnected behavior of gender studies in society can challenge inequality. This allows scholars to better understand how culture and society influence people's experience and opportunities. Gender studies also encourages critical thinking by questioning long-standing assumptions about gender and prompting greater awareness of social inequalities. Some weaknesses of the theory are that gender studies have the potential to introduce bias and division, like how the fight for women's equality can lead to less focus on men's equality. It can also lead to a neglect of biological differences, like how men's and women's brains think differently. Ironically, our views of gender studies and rules tends to operate from a Western standpoint, which can actually skew our perspectives of gender roles around the world. Additionally, because gender roles and expectations differ across cultures, applying the theory universally can sometimes oversimplify or misinterpret cultural perspectives. While gender studies offers a valuable insight into society, it is important to recognize both its strengths and limitations while using it as a critical lens.